Have you ever played a game that felt just right to you? A game in which its world you were content with simply existing in which time could melt by with so little as a second thought? If you've played at least a few games in your life, maybe one or a few titles have struck a chord with you in this way. And if you haven't played a few games, then I'm not really sure how you got here. I'm talking about a game that feels cozy to you. A comfort game. Having conversations about video games, I notice whenever people talk about their comfort games, there's characteristics of said game that connect with that person on an individual level. Maybe the story or characters of that comfort game hit that person at a really specific point in their life. Could be that it's a game they use to bond with friends or family, or the game provided an overall memorable atmosphere or player experience that sticks in the mind of people who find comfort in it. It's a topic I find myself thinking about a lot. What makes a game cozy? Obviously, cozy is subjective, and people are going to have different preferences in terms of games and aesthetics. The answer to this question varies heavily on an individual basis, so I can only really speak for myself and maybe people who have similar tastes to me, which is why I'd like to urge you all at any point to take a trip down to the comments and answer. What games are cozy to you, and why? With that being said, Google defines cozy as giving a feeling of comfort, warmth, and relaxation. Now, when the words cozy and game are brought up in the same sentence, typically simulation games like Animal Crossing or first would come to mind, and for pretty good reason. The Animal Crossing series epitomizes comfort. The slow pace of gameplay, combined with a lighthearted aesthetic and cute characters, gives the player the sense that this game isn't trying to rush you, even with Tom Nook's accruing debt constantly hanging over your head. New Horizons' island aesthetic especially does it for me, and during the pandemic was easily my go-to comfort game. My quarantine started in tandem with the game's release, and because of that, I was able to just take it in a day at a time. Not like I didn't have the time to spare. Slowly building my island day after day, gaining new residents and basking in the atmosphere the game set before me. An atmosphere so strong, when you're in the flow of playing the game, time ceases to exist and hours can melt away without you even noticing. An atmosphere that projects through the screen. I'd get shivers when it rained on the island, and I'd likewise feel the warmth of a sunny day. It's a feeling that I can only think to accurately describe as full immersion. Minecraft is a similar game to Animal Crossing in the sandbox sim space that scratches similar immersive itches. Depending on any amount of mods or resources you inject your game with, the tone could change drastically, but vanilla Minecraft has this feeling about it, a particular nostalgic atmosphere. The same day-by-day immersion as Animal Crossing, where hours can fly by while doing any number of menial tasks. Minecraft and Animal Crossing to some can be seen as boring, understandably so, but to me, and I'm sure many of you, are incredibly cozy and satisfying experiences. But the games in the life sim sandbox genre are conventionally cozy. Their simple controls and easy to pick up natures create a relatively low stress experience, and if these games were all I wanted to talk about, then there wouldn't really be a point in this video. Instead, I wanted to talk about less conventional cozy games. Games where a feeling of solace and comfort can be found in very unexpected places, and how any game can offer its own unique comforts from an individual point of view. Last year, I played Shadow of the Colossus for the first time via the PS4 remake, and I'm not gonna lie, I really hated it. I thought the controls and puzzles were obtuse and the world empty, with nothing to do outside of hunting these admittedly breathtaking colossi. But the amazing art direction and score was entirely overshadowed by my complete frustration with the game. And I must have been hit with Bozo Brain too, because I couldn't wrap my head around the mechanics of each individual Colossus. Your boy was a little stupid. I thought it was dumb, and so after getting stuck on the fourth boss, I uninstalled the game. It was extra disappointing because in a lot of circles, it's seen as a must-play game, spoken of in the same vein as Final Fantasy VII and Ocarina of Time. And at the time, I couldn't see why. But recently, I decided to give it another shot, and something clicked for me. It was actually this moment where things started to make sense. I started to understand what it was that I was missing. The importance of environmental clues. Following this boss, my eyes opened, and learning how the game expected me to play made me look at subsequent encounters differently. Before, I was thinking too linearly. My entire initial experience with this game was clouded in frustration, down to even the tutorial. And with my newfound sense of clarity, I was able to see the game for what it truly is. And what it is to me is a marvel of atmosphere. Outside of Colossus encounters, the world is mostly empty. In most cases, an empty open world is empty to a fault. In Shadow of the Colossus, the world is empty by design. You, playing the protagonist Wander, are meant to feel isolated amongst the game's sprawling environments. That sense of loneliness, the feeling of insignificance you feel being in these large, open, desolate, and beautiful environments is completely intentional because you aren't supposed to be here. That isolation mixed with the absolutely breathtaking environments you traverse between Colossi does something to me. Even though the game world is one that treats the player and wander coldly, almost indifferently, at the same time it radiates a certain warmth. It has an atmosphere that almost feels like being wrapped in a blanket on a rainy day. And if you've ever been truly immersed into a game, you know the feeling I'm talking about. To me, this game is cozy. Part of me wishes I'd grown up with Shadow of the Colossus on the PS2. I find that for me personally, PlayStation 2 games as a whole radiate a certain kind of comfort. I'd like to believe it's for some deeply analytical reason, that maybe because of the limitations of that hardware, limitations that don't exist now, developers couldn't be frivolous with graphical power, and great art direction was essential to make visually coherent games. Not saying that great art direction isn't an important commodity now, as we see what great art direction can produce when used in tandem with modern developer tools. But because tools are easier and more powerful, that barrier to entry is significantly lower. I could say that, but to be honest, nostalgia probably plays a large part in why I feel the way I feel. Recently, I've been playing through Final Fantasy XII for the first time. I got the game for the PlayStation 2 a couple years back, but decided instead to play it via the Zodiac Age remaster with its quality of life improvements. And something about this game is so wildly comforting to me. See, something I noticed while writing this video is that the games I find cozy, outside of conventionally cozy games, tend to share a love of neutral colors. It wasn't an unpopular design choice on the PS2, and many of the games I grew up with similarly had relatively muted color palettes. Notably, one game in particular that will be talked about later in this video. I don't know if my bias towards these neutral palettes is due to nostalgia or personal preference, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The warm tones of the game and character designs by the great Akihiko Yoshida complement each other beautifully. This game's atmosphere and aesthetic is gorgeous. I love each main character's design. They all have their own distinct motifs, and what I really appreciate about the character designs is how unique they are to Final Fantasy XII. The character designs feel realistic and grounded to the world around them, and by proxy, the world feels more grounded and personal. Immersive, if you will. One aspect of this game I can definitely say contributes to the codes is the gameplay. More specifically, the Gambit system. If you aren't familiar with Final Fantasy XII in any capacity, the game's combat works like this. It's a real-time automated combat system sharing surface-level similarities to Xenoblade Chronicles or your typical MMO. You have a party of 3 to 4 characters which you can control interchangeably, and each character's combat revolves around a list of customizable automated commands, each with any number of parameters you can choose from. You could, in theory, control the flow of combat manually for all of your characters, but I'm not gonna lie, you're putting yourself in for a pretty bad time. This is where the Gambit system comes into play. Learning the ins and outs of this system is not only crucial to enjoying your time with this game, but also extremely satisfying. Not only do the gambits you choose to use matter, but the order in which they're placed matters too. Meaning if you place, say, a healing gambit underneath an attack gambit, you're not getting healed until after combat is done, because attacking is your priority. For me, interacting with this system makes for an engaging experience and manages to immerse me even deeper into this game. Figuring out the right combinations of gambits for my whole party and watching them all work synchronously like clockwork is so extremely satisfying. It makes combat weirdly comforting, despite how little interaction is required on my part. Alongside the combat and characters, the story and aesthetic also hits me in a soft spot. From what I've played so far, the interactions between the characters never cease to be interesting, even if some characters have less stakes in the stories than others.
Sorry. That dinner will have to wait.
I told you.
The variety of accents and the characters in the world also just adds to that sense of believability in this game world. It's like all the characters in the cast are genuinely from different parts of this world.
I have some business there as well.
An audience with a Marquis, by chance?
Both here. Just take us, and this is yours.
The gods are toying with us.
Going out of my way to complete bounties makes me feel that much more connected with the world and its inhabitants. The Sky Pirate Den was a genuine surprise to me when I discovered its existence. Seeing new Final Fantasy Tactics-style renditions of the main characters gives me even more incentive to play, just to see the den eventually fill up. It's a small feature, but I think it's neat. And the bestiary is the cherry on top to all of that, giving you more insight to the enemies and creatures you find out in the wild. And I can't lie, the aesthetic of this game does feel nostalgic to me, probably because of the PS2 era visuals and UI, which is nice. When I pick up Final Fantasy XII, it's hard to put down, and I find myself getting drawn into its world and systems, and the more I play, the further immersed I get into this game. For me, this game is cozy. So what can we gather from this? Well, in regards to my own taste, What a game needs to get me totally hooked is 3 things. Expertly crafted, cohesive atmosphere. This includes art direction, music, and tone, engaging gameplay, and consistent pacing. Most other games I consider very cozy easily fall under these criteria. Like I said at the start of the video, cozy is subjective, and for most of you, my criteria for what makes a game comforting will differ. And so to explore this topic from another perspective, I asked for help from my good buddy Maestro.
At this point, I'd say most people in the gaming industry are familiar with From Software, the studio behind games such as Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and even 2022's Elden Ring. A common idea that people throw around when talking about these games, though, is that they're challenging or even frustrating. But for me, as someone who's been playing them for the past 8 years, they're also a source of peace. The worlds that From Software build are commonly full of despair or death, both from a narrative and gameplay perspective. Environments and civilizations that have been destroyed or left to rot either through the hubris of their own leaders or through the will of the gods of those worlds. You are made to feel small. Everything is bigger than you, deadlier than you. But through your own actions and perseverance, you can overcome it. There is no obstacle you can't defeat, and for me, that is where the coziness and warmth of these games come in. I personally find exploring dark or somber tones in any art form therapeutic. These games will kick your teeth in, but as long as you keep getting back up, keep trying, you will beat them. You'll feel great when you do, and it will all be because of the work that you put in. It's a wonderful way to express yourself, your anger, your depression, your anxiety. SoulsBorne games represent these battles in a way, or at least they do for me. That's why no matter how I'm feeling, whenever I boot one of them up, it puts me at ease. It's heartwarming in a way, and it makes me feel in control. Or in other words, cozy.
I originally had another section planned for Resident Evil 4 in this video, but I realized if I covered this game in this video, we'd be here all day. So instead, I'll mark this as a kind of part 1. Part 2 is going to be solely focused on Resident Evil 4 and why I think it's the coziest game ever made.